The Russians, rough equivalents to these vehicles, the UR-500, which the Russians now call Proton, and it was to be used for a manned circumlunar mission. And during the period from March 1967 through about December 1970, the Russians launched about 7 of these vehicles. None of them manned. Several were launch failures. In fact, that's what stopped that program short. And it was the development of this particular vehicle and the circumlunar missions that purportedly had NASA move up the Apollo 9 from an Earth orbital LEM test mission to the circumlunar test mission that we had with Borman, Lovell, and Anders. And that essentially put the skids right on that particular mission for the Russians. At the same time, they were developing this large booster, the N1L3. It's a 5-stage booster. 2 of the stages are enclosed in this large shroud, and they were capped on the inside with a lunar lander and a lunar orbiter. And I'll show you the comparison of hardware at this point. They launched 4 of these boosters, from 2 in 1969, 1 in 1971, and 1 in 1972. And all 4 boosters ended up blowing up. The first one was in February 1969, and 70 seconds into flight, the booster broke up. Right about the time the first and second stages were going to do their staging thing, and they were going to continue on going. The other 2 were various types of pad accidents, and some of these were photographed in spectacular fashion by U.S. reconnaissance satellites, and the burn areas still show in that area of the steppe around in Kazakhstan from that particular accident. These, of course, this is the Apollo lunar module and the Apollo command modules. You're very familiar with those if you followed this part of the program. These are Russian equivalents over here. The Russian lunar lander and the lunar orbiting Soyuz. They call it a lunar orbiting spacecraft. This one's called the lunar spacecraft. This is the lunar orbiting spacecraft. This is the vehicle they launched for the circumlunar missions, the Zons. They only acknowledged 4 separate missions in the series, and there were almost twice as many. They launched turtles, they had eggs, they had fruit flies, and a whole variety of biological payloads, but never got to the point where they could launch men on board. These vehicles right here, it's believed they tested the service module on the spacecraft in, let's see, it would have been 1967, but the Russians have contradicted themselves on this point and said, well, no, it was another type of spacecraft entirely. However, they tested 4 flights of their lunar module in various versions. What you have here is a large kick stage. It's used to essentially break the complex in lunar orbit. And also, after the cosmonaut would have EVA'd out of this hatch down inside the complex, this spacecraft would have been supported by a large, essentially a cylindrical structure that attaches to this final stage. The astronaut would have gone in through an opening to this hatch. Then this entire section would have detached away, fired its engine down here, and this shows you part of the sequence on this, in fact. It started free fall from out of lunar orbit at that point. That shows the hardware. They would fire this engine down here, detach this stage, and hopefully, very hopefully, fire the engines right here so you have controlled descent to landing. And the point here is, unlike our Apollo LEM, which used the same engine to do the deorbit, burn, and land, you're relying on 2 separate engine systems. And logic tells you if you have twice as many engine systems, twice as many things are going to go wrong. And Russians have had trouble with these kind of engines. With the Soyuz, they're very similar. These hypergolics, they've had a malfunction in Earth orbit before, and though the possibilities are remote, less than 10%, you don't want to do it with a single guy that's in this capsule.
Sir?
Yes.
Security requirements right now are clear for the net.
Everything's taken care of.
Okay, so you don't need a second, what I understand?
No, we need a table or anything else, but it's taken care
Yeah,
of.
that's
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Forget that one. Definitely have it.
But essentially, you've got this LEM dropping from orbit, and you're hoping you fire the engines to cushion your landing. If not, well, whatever the impact speed is coming from lunar, if you fired a descent burn, it's enough to kill you, the cop's not dead. Right here, and I'm sorry about the way the view graph came up, it is very small solid motors right here. They're designed that once this lem of theirs touched down, they fire these 4 engines all the way around, which essentially will drive the lander's pads into the surface, so it wouldn't do a bounce. That's one thing they were afraid of when the thing would land, is that the thrust from these motors on the regular engines on the bottom would cause it to bounce across the surface a little bit. It's similar to what we had happen with one of the surveyors. We had fire its engines and skip a little bit, and the Russians apparently were very scared of this. So they had a series of 4 small solid engines that would fire and freeze it right into place, and then they'd turn off the main engines. Once the cosmonaut would come down this ladder, do his EVA, scoop up soil samples, he'd go back up, they'd fire the exact same engine that he used to land with, and leave this bottom truss work with the landing legs behind, and drop this back up into lunar orbit, and link back up with the lunar orbiting Soyuz. And as I pointed out earlier, the cosmonaut had an EVA not only from this spacecraft to here, but back again. There was no through tunnel, pressurized transfer system at this time for their lunar module. What they had at the nose up here, essentially it was you can liken it almost to a blunt dart. And what they had on the lunar orbit, on the lunar lander here, was a honeycomb-filled structure that essentially would take that dart, let it impale it, and then what they had was 4 small flat panels on the docking system on the Soyuz that would stop it short from doing any further damage. And the 2 would be linked in orbit. And at that point, the cosmonaut would come back out this hatch and EVA back over, go back inside, and they detach the lunar module. And yeah, somebody's shaking his head back there, and he's going, "What a cumbersome way." It was really cumbersome, because with our LEM, we had a pressurized transfer tunnel all the way through. We could keep 5 pounds per square inch of pressure. The Russians had a double whammy. Not only did they have to try to keep pressure on their spacecraft, but they're using sea level pressurization on there, so 15 pounds per square inch roughly, and a mixed oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. So one advantage the Russians were using with that atmosphere is they were allowing their cosmonaut to pre-breathe pure oxygen, drop down to 5 psi, and then go out with his EVA suit. To this day, they're still very touchy about pressurization problems on their spacecraft, particularly since the Soyuz eliminations. That's the gist of how they were going to do their lunar landing program. And as well as I do, there have been no cosmonauts on the moon. And the success rate's been very, very bad with this program. And you can start cutting into questions. Yeah.
Are you implying that they're still doing this?
Oh, the lunar program? No. What happened in 1974, after the last launch of this N1L3 rocket was in 1972, the decision was made to scrap the entire lunar program. There were 2 other boosters, N1L3s, that were assembled. They were scrapped on site. Pieces of the booster, the tanks on these things, and this is another engineering difference. They essentially used what appears to be very close to the closest thing we can liken it to is the top dome of the tank. They used spherical tanks on their first, second, and third stages of this piece. There weren't any. The tanks weren't integral with the skin like on our Saturn V's or our Saturn 1B's, or even like their Proton ones. They had separate, suspended tanks. And instead of trying to run plumbing through the middle, each of these pieces that you see right here, that's the conduit that the propellant goes through. That it's a piece of conduit, actually aerodynamic shielding on it. Inside it is a plumbing line. There's no through plumbing on these tanks. It's a monstrously complex vehicle. The first stage has 36 engines. The second stage has 8. The fourth has 4. And there are single engines on the 4th and 5th stages. And needless to say, they had severe pogo problems with this thing from the first launch on. That's what they figured what happened was that the first one they were trying to ignite, the second stage and something tore apart. The other 2 they had either engine malfunctions to some extent, but mainly propellant lines broke on those. And the system was designed to essentially shut down the opposite rocket engines on the other side of the booster. So if one over here experienced let's say a liquid oxygen line broke, which physically did happen on one of the launches, the other one would shut down. Well, what happened was they had a whole series of these engines break down in one of the launches, and lifted up a little ways and came right back down on top of the pad. Took the whole pad facility out. But no, they're not trying this mission. They're no longer trying this scenario any longer. Pieces of the tanks now are being used as water storage tanks at Cosgrove. Sections of one of the launch shrouds are being used as storage buildings. One half of one of these fuel tanks is used as an open-air amphitheater. It's a very ignominious way to end such this program. 3 of the lunar landers are known to still be in existence right now. One's in Moscow, one's in St. Petersburg, another one's in Leningrad at various design bureaus and engineering areas. The lunar orbiting cosmos up here, the Soyuz, what they want to call it, very few engineering examples exist of that. The descent modules are virtually identical to the current Soyuz craft. The orbital modules are the same thing, and the engineering and the instrument modules, there only appears to be one example, and that's in Moscow. It's virtually stripped apart. So some of the hardware is in pieces now.
How much of this stuff have you seen?
Personally, myself, none, but I've seen photographs from all 3 sites plus the Cosgrove itself.
Have you made it over there yet?
No, that takes more money than this little artist can afford right now. And all magazines are cutting back on budgets. Good question.
The Soviet rover, the Lunar, was that concurrent with the man program? Or
Well, I was in
after
competition as well. This is,
something?
unlike the United States, and this is I think, direct reflection of the problems that they had. Once we decided in '62 which direction we were going to take with lunar orbit rendezvous, all the design, essentially all the design in the United States clicked into line. Granted, there's tweaking, they had to go on the weight reduction program for LEM, and then final engineering for all the hardware involved. But all the contractors worked in concert with each other. In the Soviet Union, the 20 to 30 design bureaus that were involved in the various aspects of various Soviet space programs, military, unmanned science, manned military, stations, lunar, were all fighting each other. There were 3 separate design bureaus alone that were competing for the lunar landing project. The one that won out had originally had the task taken away from them in 1962 and '63. 2 years they worked on other manned projects. That's the Korolev Bureau, which is the NPO Energia now. They had the manned lunar program taken away from them for 2 years and then reassigned back to them. And then on top of this, there's the Lushko Bureau, the Gas Dynamics Laboratory, was competing as well. And then you had the Cholnay Bureau, which is now, I believe it's NPO Krynyshev, which designs the proton booster and has absorbed NPO Soyuz, which handled some of the assembly as well. So you had the 3 major design bureaus fighting each other with knives behind their backs, with the Bahadur, just literally knifing each other. And you figure they lost definitely 2 years that you know of. If you take it's like taking von Braun off the lunar landing project and putting that down 2 years ago. It'd be inconceivable in the States. But apparently in the Soviet hierarchy at that time, as far as the bureaucratic infighting, the politicians appeared to encourage it quite a bit. There were political points to be won with the Communist Party as far as power and prestige, and different members of the Politburo backed different design bureaus. And if you can imagine, the major aerospace companies each cutting each other's throats for various projects every year. Here in the States, that's what's going on in the former state of the Soviet Union for years. So you figure they lost 2 or 3 years right there. And that's just a design bureau. That doesn't include the politics that put up with, first Stalin, then Khrushchev, then Brezhnev and Kosygin, and then now what's going on over there now.
Do you know if the Russians have film footage of these?
Oh yeah, there's some impressive footage of one of them lifting off. And it's in this first stage igniting looks like the classic plug nozzle engines that a lot of us envisioned for the single stage orbit vehicle. It's really impressive seeing it lift off. It's also real impressive seeing them blow up like that. I mean, it's they light the sky up when they go up. And apparently there's footage of all the flights. The Russians are just, they're getting a little greedy now. They're charging money for these archives. You had a question?
Yeah. One comment, the Chelomey Bureau had on its staff and Nikita Khrushchev's son,
Oh,
which
yeah.
I think helped them until 1964, of course, when Khrushchev.
When he got purged,
One thing I'm interested in is whether there was any relationship at all between the proton lunar orbiter, lunar what do you call it?
design.
The Zond program and the N1 landing
Oh, God, was
program.
there.
And even at the level of cosmonaut training or anything like that.
Well, there are two completely separate programs. So the cosmonaut training one was for the Circle Lunar program with the Zond and the Proton, or the Zond and the UR500 as they call it then, and the N1L3 program. But what happened here, there's an interesting story behind this. The Chelomey Bureau designed the first three stages of this rocket. The Proton that's pictured here for the Zonds and the one used for the Geosyncs, virtually the same vehicle. Has an added fourth stage up here. It's the identical stage that they used to deboost the lunar lander, the lunar orbit, to land. Interesting story behind this. Chelomey Bureau was having great difficulties developing this stage up here. Their preference was to use hypergolic, self-igniting propellants. Korolyov's people preferred tried and true liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen and kerosene. And that was their mainstay. And then the gas dynamics laboratory, they wanted to get into exotic propellants. Fluorine, high energy propellants, and there was no way, we're not touching this stuff. Well, it was getting down to the deadline on getting this particular booster going, and Korolyov made a suggestion. Well, gee whiz, we've got this really great fifth stage up here, restartable, and it's just about identical specs to the stage you're trying to develop right up here. Why don't you guys just use our stage? And Chelomey's people, no way, they would have nothing to do with this idea. They said, no, we'll get our job done. And Khrushchev, and this was about the time Brezhnev and everybody else was in power. Korolyov came to Brezhnev's people and said, now listen, it's obvious they can't get the job done. We've got the stage designed and ready to go. Just use our stage up there. Make them use it. So there's a political decision. And the stage they used for the fifth stage here, the Block D, and they call it that to this day, is used as the fourth stage here. And for years, the analysts couldn't understand Block D. Soviets used lettering in sequence, A, B, V, G, D, and so on in their alphabet, in Cyrillic. Well, four stages, it's like going A, B, C, E in English. Where's D at here? Where's that fourth stage come from? Well, because Korolyov's people call it the Block D, they insisted that nomenclature even be used. That's called wiping their face in it. You can't even call it a fourth stage, you gotta call it a fifth stage, guys, because it came from us. And it's like, it's insult to injury a little bit here. So, it's interesting because, you've got the Block A, the Block B, the Block G, A, B, G, and D on this thing. It's just monstrous. And right there you can see, if you reflect back to the simplicity of the Saturn V design, 5 engines, 5 smaller engines, 1 engine, 1, 2, 3, 40 plus engines on the other beast, 5 stages. It's just a monster. And we blew them all up as a consequence.
Did they get the Proton man-rated, or
If you look at
how
the
close were
record,
they to actually?
if we had
putting
flown
somebody
Apollo
on?
9 when we did, let's make sure interesting little look-see right here. It's got the launch manifest right here. They had launches of this Proton. 2 were launched in 4 were launched in 1967. 2 of those were failures. Right there, that sets them back as far as man rating. They had another Proton launch, which they called Zond 4, and somehow they didn't recover the capsule. There's some type of communication failure. Rumor has it was recovered in China, but nobody knows for sure. 2 more launches after that, up to July 1968, were launch failures. But if we'd done that with the Saturn 1B, I think somebody's tail would have been in trouble down at Huntsville at that time. You could have lost 1 Saturn 1B in their schedule. But they lost, out of their first 7 launches, they lost all but 1 launch. So right there, that kind of throws your man rating program right in the creek real quick. Because their usual The usual Soviet policy is to launch anywhere from 2 to 4 rockets with the intended spacecraft. Very similar to with the Vostok program, they launched 4 precursors, actually launched 5. One was one mission just didn't quite work out because it was a launch failure. With the Soyuz, they managed to level that back down to 2. With Proton, there are very severe oscillations, vibrations, and resonances that are put upon the spacecraft. When you operate into the shroud, whether it's a space station in this place, or up here, a manned circumlunar spacecraft, a planetary probe, the engines on the Proton are just vicious as far as kicking out vibrations and resonances. And from the launch manifest that they have here, you can't lose more than half these kind of rockets. There's some serious mechanical problems. Since that point, Proton's been improved to what's called 98% reliability factor. But the early years, those first 2 years, they didn't get 50% of it. But I take no, they didn't. And it's obvious they didn't. They didn't launch any manned circumlunar missions. They didn't launch any manned heavy lunar spacecraft. Like I said, in 1974, they pulled away from the manned lunar landing systems and they diverted all the resources in the manned orbiting systems. They had 2 competing manned station programs. One was military, one was civilian. The civilian ones we've all seen: Salyut 1, Salyut 4, Salyut 6, Salyut 7, and Meteor, and all the modules that are up there. There's a competing program. Originally it was called Almaz. And apparently the Almaz stations were the precursors to the Salyuts. They were military in nature, carried large synthetic radar aperture arrays on board. They carried reconnaissance payloads. The pressure cabins of this, the 4 and 5 meter diameter pressure modules in this, were adapted for the civilian stations. The Almaz stations, they launched 3 of them. They didn't quite work out as well as they thought they would. And they kind of abandoned the program. They turned it to an unmanned radar platform. But at the same time that they were doing these manned military stations, there was a large vehicle. The Russians had talked about a spacecraft called Zarya. And essentially it was a large counterpart to the Soyuz transport. And essentially what it was a what we call a heavy cosmos, what we now see in orbit as the Crystal or the Cavant 2 modules. Those originally were to be manned-rated vehicles launched by Proton. On top was a small recoverable capsule, similar in size to the recovery capsule in the Soyuz called Mercury, which translates into Mercury. And essentially, unlike the Soyuz, which has a launch shroud over it, Mercury was, like our Apollo, exposed to the elements as it launched. And essentially a very similar shape to Apollo, about the same conical angle. On top of it was a steeper cone that contained the deorbit engine systems for that module and its parachute recovery systems. And on top of that, plumped right on top of that, was a launch escape system. And the Russians were releasing drawings of it, and, well, geez, if you guys were to launch one man, you don't need a launch escape system. Oh no, it was going to be launched manned. So they were trying to man-rate it for both the Zond circumlunars and later on for these Mercury missions, these Almaz missions. Yeah.
This moon launcher is called N1.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first 3 stages are N1.
I look at this
The
thing.
upper payload is called L3.
Okay.
Yeah.
I look at this thing, and I compare it to Saturn.
Yeah.
Saturn is essentially an aluminum can with very thin walls, and it's almost all fuel.
Yeah. This is steel. This is steel.
Well, okay, a steel can. It's bigger in volume than this thing, taller than this.
Oh, no, not 10.5. I'm saying the N1 is steel. They use
Oh,
steel
okay, yeah.
spear tanks.
Okay. Yeah, but that,
steel skin to mount it.
these are to scale, right?
Yes.
Okay. This one is shorter.
Mhm.
It's got all of this reinforcing material in it.
Heavier. Yeah.
It's got such tiny tanks attached to it, and
Yeah.
there's space in between everywhere. Whereas in Saturn V, between was it the first and second stage,
There's the interstage
you've got
and there's the interstage here.
between first and second stage. I understand they put a hemisphere.
Yeah, the
Doubled up.
dome top on the
And they doubled it up, and they added more fuel because of that.
Yeah. And same with the S2
How in
stage.
the world could these guys have possibly gotten this to the moon the way it's built?
Well,
It
you have
just
to
doesn't look like
understand
it's big enough.
the low Earth orbit capability on Saturn V is around 75 tons. Based on what they were able to launch with Skylab. The N1L3 was substantially less, so that's why they used the smaller spacecraft in comparison. And a far more complex scheme to get it there. Yes. Sorry.
I was just going to say, the other thing is that the Saturn V second and third stages were
High energy
hydrogen
fuels.
and oxygen, whereas the one with the kerosene.
Kerosene action until all the way through the stack. I was thinking.
But do you think they could have gotten this to the moon?
No.
I mean, even if it was technically safe.
All right, if they'd gotten the pogo problems under control, if they got the rocket system to work, yeah, you could have gotten there. But I don't see how you can physically, the way they designed this first stage cluster, they even redesigned it for the last 2 launches. And it still didn't work. The pogo was so bad it tore apart the propeller lines. Yeah.
I've had a similar thought to this gentleman, especially some of the stuff I read recently. They didn't approve the moon landing program until sometime in 1964.
Well, actually, no.
Might be late
There was a precursor to it. Now, this is where they pulled Crawley off of it. He had a plan to use the Soyuz spacecraft with a number of refueling tugs that would fuel up a final stage and launch a circumlunar mission. Remember, we said to launch a man on the moon or whatever and return him safely. Hey, if they can get a man out there and back, they can just about claim the same thing. That was part of the Zond mission as well. If they could have gotten those Zonds around, they could have easily claimed, we got a man out to the moon and return him safely.
You mean they didn't land it?
Yeah, well, they were masters. Remember what they did with Sputnik, what they did with the Vostok program, what they did with Vashkad? Their idea was the spectacular, to do the one-upsmanship thing. Hey, we're going to launch 2 men in Gemini. Hey, we're going to launch 3 in Vashkad. Beat that. Oh, you're going to do an EVA? Yeah, we'll beat you to it with the Vashkad too. You're going to try and launch the first man into space with Mercury? Yes, again. You were going to try and launch the first satellite? Yeah, we beat you. They're good, and this is the Khrushchev influence in their program, and it carried on into their manned program. So Korolev had this plan to do what they call the Soyuz complex. Well, right about the time that he was ready to get the decision plans underway, they yanked him off the program. He said, nope, these guys got a better idea. Yeah, right.
The Mercure capsule, is that the very odd Hershey's Kiss-shaped capsule that was at the
It's shaped, the cone on the capsule is a little steeper than on the Apollo CS.
That was the one that sort of got
That's one that was sold
attention.
at auction at Sotheby's. They had another return capsule as well that they used in some of the military salutes. They auctioned a bunch of stuff off earlier this year at a Sotheby's auction. Part one was the actual lunar landing suit they were going to use for the EVA. They were auctioning off hardware left and right and stuff, and some people picked up some gems and stuff. Yeah.
Did they ever get to the point of actually selecting crews for these things?
Oh yes, Gauthier was part of the training program. He was apparently actively involved with both, not just the training end of it, but he was in training for apparently one of the missions when he was killed in that MiG crash. So, and that was part of getting his flight time in that he wanted. And apparently there were a number of crews that were selected for both the UR-500 Zonds and the N1L3 training programs. And they got themselves dispersed at the end of that. I mean, the whole program got shaken up in '72 when they diverted into the manned spaceship program.
Now the very elderly pictures we've seen of what was supposed to be the Soviet moon rocket look like similar to that, but the upper stages were basically looked like the proton.
You're talking way up here.
Yeah, that you had like the first stage, and then the first stage of the proton was mated to the top.
You're talking some of some of the earlier drawings.
Right. Where did that
Oh,
stand?
there's been some interesting. For years, those of us that are involved in some illustrating this, we get information told to us by sources within the United States government who won't even tell you who they are. Spook sources is what they're nicknamed. And Charlie Vick had gotten a spook source telling him, first stage on the lunar rockets, kind of going, we were going, okay. At the time, we thought they were going to use, they're going to use some proton hardware, all the analysts did, for the moon launcher. In fact, the guys that designed this vehicle had a vehicle, a proposal stage called the UR-700, which apparently the first stage was colossal compared to, it is a large first stage like this. There's some debate whether it would use multiple tanks, a single tank assembly or whatever, but they had these huge storable rocket engine, fueled engines that developed thrust, maybe 8 or 9, like on Saturn 1B, but they would give them the thrust that they needed to launch the payload to land on the moon. And they never, that was another competing program that got shot down, the lunar landing hardware. Part of that stuff was being leaked out of Russia. And that's how some of the idea that the conical first stage was topped by a proton with other hardware. And I fell victim to it too. I mean, it's a natural assumption to make. They use existing hardware as much as they can. At the time, I myself didn't realize the infighting that was going on in this program. You had the 3 separate major design bureaus, each one in turn would knife the other as good as they could with their buddies in the Politburo. And just amazing. So there's been some incorrect analysis on everybody's part. But then the Russians finally wised up, started releasing some photographs. Heavily retouched, but they released some photos. They end up here, they just airbrushed the junk out of it. They like tapered it to a point. They're going, yeah, right. And they finally started releasing some photographs of these things on the launch pads and nice drawings. And just recently they launched this beautiful photo of 2 of these N1s on pads. And some of the photo analysts that I know have been looking at these and they say, oh, time out. This is the same rocket. They only shrunk down a photo and they pasted it in here. And they started pointing out little bits of details like, well, in the foreground, there's this lamp post right here. Well, on the little one over here that's supposedly in the background, you can see where they've airbrushed out the lamp post very badly. And then things like lighting conditions. When you have something off in the distance, the lighting should be a little bit different. They had a real fakey, gibbous moon hanging in between. It's a real hack job on a photo, and some people notice it now.
If my memory serves me right, one piece of film I've seen though shows 2 on the pad, and I've heard people talk about that one day the reconnaissance satellites showed this as well.
The before and after.
I'll let you comment on that. There was something else I wanted to mention. There was a rumor that the final N1 launch, and I'll just throw this out and let you comment on it, that the final N1 launch actually had a space station on it.
No. There were some, about the time, let's see, the last N1 launches were about 72 and 73, no, 71 and 72. It's about the time that we had the Apollo 13 accident. And I think you folks remember Walter Mondale and Senator Proxmire are both saying, well, space is too dangerous for us to be launching people to the moon for such frivolous reasons when we have people dying and starving down here on Earth. So let's cut the last 3 missions and cut the second Skylab at the same time. So we lost Apollos 18, 19, and 20 in Skylab B or 2, whatever you want to call it, as far as the second Skylab. The Russians, in response, rekindled their interest in their manned lunar landing program. About the same time, they launched and tested 4 times their lunar lander. They launched 1 full-up lunar landing test in a Proton, and 3 of the other tests were just the lunar lander itself to test the engines. They launched those on a Soyuz booster, tested the jump out of them in Earth orbit, and apparently had it ready. That was man-rated. The lunar orbit Soyuz was man-rated at that point as well. And if these things had succeeded, we decided to cancel Apollo. One could conceivably conclude that they would have taken up the reins and started landing men on the moon if they could make the system work. Lots of ifs. Didn't turn out that way. They decided in 74, well, this is a waste of time. By this point, several prominent engineers in Korolev's design bureau, who were now in charge, had been advocating stations since the 60s. Were now, they were getting their political points in. They launched several military stations, several civilian stations successfully, and then they have all this hardware that they destroyed on the lunar programs. They were able to successfully argue, cancel this thing. Put it to sleep now, and let us do our job. So you saw Proton, they use it with 3 stages to launch the first stations. And then, the 4 stages of Proton, they use for the unmanned probes. But as far as a large heavyweight station, no. They were talking about it for the longest time, but they never got it to that point where they could launch it. there was an enlarged version of a much more ambitious 1-month lunar stay program that they wanted to do, but that never got past the drawing boards or wind tunnel tests. On top of this, there were at least 2 more N1 launches that were planned for 1974. They canceled. Those are the 2 rockets to be scrapped. And then as well at the, I think it's the TRUD Aviation Works in Russia, they have components and engines for at least 2 more N1s, all the engines. And these were not the original ones that they'd used, but these were upgrades of those for later N1 versions. And those ones they want to sell over here to the West, of course, you know, say, hey, we've wrapped them in plastic and they've been there for 20 years, and come buy them. Somebody else had a hand for it, yeah.
I have a question about Gauthier. He was not known publicly at all. Where
Not till his death.
he was alive, but the first Russian award received information after his death, and he was the father of all these Russian
The father of
achievements.
Soviet cosmonauts.
And if he was really such good organizer and engineer, or only he has good connection with politicians, with perspective, I don't know.
He was a great organizer. I mean, if you look at what he did with the hardware that he had for Sputnik, for the Lunas, the very first lunar probes, the first Vostoks, the Vashkads, the early Soyuz launches, he did fantastic work with the resources he had at his disposal. But he also had some very prominent opposition. Glushko, the father of Soviet rocket engines, was opposed to his plan for lunar landing. Sholmay, who led the design bureau for the Proton, for the essentially the entire stable of storable rocket, sea-launched ballistic missiles, and ICBMs, was his bitter opponent for years. And on top of this, there's the problems that Korolev had with his political past. During the Stalin years, he was attached to a design bureau under Tupolev. And Tupolev was a contemporary, I think it was one of the main Soviet marshals. And this was about the time they did these major purges just before World War II. Tupolev ended up being assigned to a prison outside Moscow to do his aviation design bureau work. Korolev was a little less fortunate. He got sent to the gold mines in Siberia for about half a year. And Tupolev petitioned and got him essentially a work pardon. They transferred him to the same prison where Tupolev was. And this is about the time that the Germans attacked attacked the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And they were assigned essentially to build weapons to stop the fascists. It's believed that shortly after World War II that Korolev was returned to the kind hands of, I believe it was at that time NKVD, for another prison stay. And then they had Stalin's death, and then he was politically rehabilitated and given back his party papers and welcomed back with open arms. But those years that he spent in the hands of NKVD, it exhausted him physically. He lost his first wife. He divorced her. As a result, his personal life suffered and his health suffered. In fact, it's believed it was one of the contributing factors to his death. During surgery for hemorrhoids of all the argon things, he hemorrhaged to death. It's believed that what happened was he went in for a simple hemorrhoid operation. They discovered cancer in his colon, and instead of stopping the operation, patching him up and then making sure they got a proper blood supply and all the things you need for cancer surgery, this physician, who is apparently one of the top Kremlin head honchos in medicine, said, no, we continue the surgery. I mean, no way. I mean, I can save this man's life. Well, he ended up killing him on the operating table. The other surgeon, who was the most skilled in this form of cancer surgery, was called in during the course of the surgery and he told him, I'm sorry, I don't operate on dead men. They killed him dead. And this is from one of the emigres that came over here to the United States, to the West, that related this with the story. Yeah.
Have you seen that film yet?
The Secret Designer film.
So it shows a whole bunch of rocket launches?
Yeah. In fact, it's the
Did you get
same.
a copy?
I can get a copy. I mean, I saw it when it was on A&E, and it was impressive. It also showed one of the major accidents in Soviet rocketry. back in 1960, and this is when Khrushchev was at the UN with his shoe on the table, doing his thing, and they were trying to launch 2 missions to Mars, the first 2 Mars missions, which they launched them, the final stages didn't ignite, and they came back down into the atmosphere, and the Russians never admitted the launches. And the United States said, whoa, wait a minute, at the UN, you know, you've got 2 launches you're not accounting for right here. Well, there's a 3rd launch, and for years a lot of the analysts thought it was a 3rd Mars mission. What it was, the Chalmers Bureau besides designing this booster right here, like I said, also designed their primary storable ICBMs, you know, their equivalents to our Titan II missile. They had one, the very first one was called the SS-7, the Sadler. And it was the first storable, really usable Soviet ICBM that they were putting into service. They were testing it at Boykin Cosmodrome. And it was also the primary missile test site at that point. And they had one of these SS-7s on pad, and it had it fully fueled, and the top-down clock went to 0. And the first stage engines didn't blight. Marshall Yedlin, who's at that time was the head of the strategic rocket forces for the Soviet Union, said, well, put the gantries up and find out what's wrong and launch that thing. They said, okay, sir, we'll do it right now. Everybody gets out of the blockhouses, 30, 40, 50 people on the gantries, and they're all poking away trying to find out what's wrong with the rocket. What they didn't realize is that the countdown clock that's built into the rocket isn't turned off. It's still running.
The second stage.
The second stage engine ignited, just like it would have, automatically. This whole rocket is filled with hypergolic propellants. Nitrogen, I believe they're using nitric acid and hydrogen. The nasty thing about hydrogen is when it gets on your flesh catches on fire. And there are these vivid images after the rockets exploded on the pad. You see all the you see the technicians that survived the explosion running away in flames from the pad.
And the flames catching them.
Yeah, and the flames catch them as well, but these guys are also on fire from part of it.
10 minutes.
Okay, great. Because, like I said, we're going to break this thing at 5:02, so the next panel gets a good edge in. But it's just a small symptom of, you know, just the competing nature of these design bureaus. And like I said, if we even done a fraction of what they did here in the States, we wouldn't have made it to the moon either. But it shows what happens when you don't work together with each other. All right, you had a question?
Well, something that the gentleman said earlier, I know that the pictures that's been floating around of the 2 N1s on the pad is
Apparently a forgery.
It's apparently bogus. But if I remember correctly, one of the N1s that blew up on the pad took out the second pad.
Or damaged it, I heard.
Damaged the second pad, and I heard that there was supposed to be another N1 or...
Who knows? That could be part of that scam they're playing with that photograph. But he is correct, though. This explosion occurred in '71.
Because pads are only
That was
about
6
a
months.
mile.
That was the second 1969 test. And that one occurred only just a few days before we launched the Apollo 11 flight. In fact, that launch was in July 3rd, 1969. And the other one before that was the 21st of February. So they were trying like crazy to get these things off the ground for Apollo 11. You know, you would hope they wouldn't have been trying to, you know, launch manned missions, and they were nowhere near it. But they were like down the wire as far as trying to get stuff off the ground and compete with us. They had an unmanned scooper mission. The Lunar 15 mission was trying to land on the moon at the same time Apollo 11 was. It ended up going in the dirt. They're having really bad luck at this time with their missions. And like I said, it goes right back to the fact you have, you know, at that point, 30 design bureaus, half of which are trying to do lunar missions. And nobody's coordinating. And of course, their friends in the top bureau just have a fun old time, you know, because they're getting all sorts of money for their, whatever region they're from. But just amazing. And that one mission in '69 not only flattened and destroyed the pad, well, like I say, there's apparently before and after pictures at the National Reconnaissance Office in Washington, D.C., outside Washington, D.C., showing this beautiful pad. And if you look at the shadows, you can see the outline of the rocket on the gantry. It's really nice. And then you've got the after picture and scorched earth. And it put the pads out of commission for 2 years. The next launch didn't happen until the 12th of August, no, the 27th of June, 1971. That one, the first stage apparently failed. Shortly, 12 seconds after liftoff. So it sounds like it also damaged the pad facilities. And the very last launch in the 21st of November, 1972, got about 108 seconds in the flight, and the range safety officer had to destroy the rocket. So they had just a terrible luck. And it's not even a matter of luck, it's a matter of a very terrible design going, you know, and research, development, and control going all across the board on it. Yeah, 5 minutes? Folks, I think we should break. Give the next guys a chance, so. All right. And tomorrow, we're going to have from Russia with contracts. And I have lots of stuff on Russian contributions for Alpha and some of the Mir 2 hardware that's being developed and converted into that. So come to that one, it'll be great.
Is this that picture you were talking about? Well, these are airbrushed drawings.
Oh, no, it's even worse than that. I mean, it's tapered to a cone.
This is their official.
Oh.
No, that was at 5
Smaller
yards.
yards, probably laid down to people.
This out here. You had to get a launch there. They usually do like 1 or 2 launches per year. And not sand.
At least we went more enjoyable chat.
These are their official pictures as of 1991. I don't know how accurate they are. This is what they want. You've got a map with 500 people on it.
Not that far.
I was a paid guest in the Soviet.
I heard that little story with that guy.
They gave me a vacation. So,
Yeah,
this is their official.
It's beautiful.
And this is their official map of the launch site, launch facility, except that it's not accurate. I couldn't for the life of me figure out how this matched where we went. It just doesn't make any
that's what
sense.
you like when it's on the
Right.
And, you know, of course, it's
Oh,
the
yeah.
same with the
Yeah.
a single
One
one was in the and Ed, of course, Ed, as everybody knew, he would practically fall out of his skin when he saw that. And he was on his knees to Boris to get the photo. Exactly. You know, when you get
I got one here, sir. Where are you from?
and
There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
you know, everybody knew he had a photo.
But I got more.
That's okay.
No time.
I don't know why.
You know, violate our agreement. You know, this guy had an agreement that Wayne was under the impression of.
Yeah, they had cheap that.
All photos and stuff were gonna be coming. Yeah. And that's.
Dan, did you want to go out with Glenn?
So they're leaving at
5:30.
Okay, yeah, okay, we'll see what happens here.
All right, I'll be sure to tell him.
Let's take a look, do I got any left?